was. And when you have an entire industry, a self-love, self-help industry that tells you the only way to be happy and the only way to find fulfillment is to perpetually do what you want to do in any given moment, no matter who you cut out of your life, no matter what commitments you forego, no matter what sacrifices you avoid, just do what you want to do in any given moment. An industry that worships and profits from the God of self, then yeah, you're going to get a lot of women who think that they're sticking it to the patriarchy by saying, no, I'm going to do what I want to do.
Allie Beth Stuckey, thanks for joining Exclusives.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming out to California.
I love it. I love it. The weather is almost good enough to get me to move here.
I was going to say, we got to get you to move here.
I know. Maybe if we could knock Newsom out.
That's the only way.
Figuratively speaking.
Because he's going to try to run for president, so we might be knocking him out to do that.
Yeah, to the other side of the country.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be okay for California, though. Just depends on who would take his place.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's always the problem.
Well, we'd love to have you out here. I'm a big fan of yours. I know a lot of people watching are a big fan.
Likewise.
And, you know, you're doing so much on, obviously, pro-life, fighting for life, all of these sticky bioethical issues that can be confusing. So we're going to talk about all that.
Yeah.
But first of all, how did you get into doing what you're doing? Podcasting, Relatable.
Yeah.
You have become this incredible voice for good. And tell me about the beginning of all that.
Thanks. Yeah. So it started back in 2015. So I graduated from college in 2014. I studied communications because it's really the only thing that I like to do, and really something that I've always loved to do. I've always loved to talk. I've always loved public speaking, always got in trouble in class for talking too much. And so it makes sense that I tried to make some kind of profession out of it. I went into social media and PR after college, and I didn't know where I was going to end up. It's not like I've always had this dream of talking about politics and culture. That really wasn't it. I knew I wanted to communicate in some way about the things that matter, but I had no idea what that looked like. So I took a job in social media strategy and PR because it's kind of in the vein of communications, but I just had this itch. And I remember when I was speaking, I delivered the commencement speech for college, and not because I was valedictorian, but we actually submitted speeches anonymously, and then we auditioned. It was this whole thing. But anyway,
wait, for your college?
Yeah.
What college did you go to?
I went to Furman University, so it's small. It's
so
a
you
smaller
gave
school.
the speech.
I gave
graduation
the commencement speech. Yes,
Allie.
Taylor Swift and everything, because back in 2014, her album 22 had come out, and I was 22, so you just had to. I remember when I was standing up on stage and I was looking out at the crowd, and I had almost what felt like this out-of-body experience. And I'm not really someone who thinks about those kinds of experiences or over-spiritualizes things, but I just remember so exactly what that felt like. It felt almost like a physical prick on my heart that, yes, this is what I want to do forever. I just remember thinking, I have never felt more alive and more energized than I do right now, delivering this little speech at my college commencement. And so I started kind of just chasing that conviction, chasing that dream, if you will. And again, didn't know what it looked like. But then the 2016 election rolled around. That was really the first election, not that I voted in because I had voted once before, but that I was really paying attention to, because I was out of the bubble of college. I was a working woman. I had just met my husband, then just got married, and I was really paying attention to the issues. And I looked around. I was living in Athens, Georgia, which was then kind of a conservative area. And I realized that all of these young, semi-conservative Christian women really had no idea what to think about these big issues. A lot of them that I was talking to, like I was leading a Bible study at the time, they had no idea what the election was about. They didn't know about the candidates. And I was like, I really care about this. I care about this constituency, this demographic of young college women, especially those who are Christians, they have no idea where they stand, some of them, when it comes to abortion and all of this stuff. And so I decided that I was going to go to sorority houses because I lived right by Sorority Row. And then I was going to give them a presentation just for free, just because I wanted to do it. A presentation.
Like with a PowerPoint.
Yeah, literally. No, I think it was a Prezi, which is kind of like PowerPoint, but a little bit more jazzy. Cool. Yeah. So I just reached out to these sororities and asked them, hey, can I come to your chapter meeting and can I give you a little presentation about why you should vote in the primary and why it matters? And it'll be nonpartisan, which it really was at the time. I felt like it needed to be to get my foot in the door. And so I did that and I felt that high again. Like I just felt that conviction that, yes, this is what I want to do. So long story short, it just kind of grew from there. It became a blog. I kind of ditched the nonpartisan thing. I started a blog called The Conservative Millennial. Which at the time...
I remember that.
Yes.
I remember when you entered the scene and you were, I mean, you still are obviously so cute, but you were so cute and bubbly and and there were some other voices because I feel like there's been this resurgence in conservatism.
Yeah.
A lot of younger voices over the last decade, which is great.
Yes.
When I first got involved, there was like nobody young doing it.
Right.
And
you were one of the only ones.
I mean, it is what it is, but now it's so amazing.
Yeah.
And I remember I loved, because there were different flavors of stuff happening. And when you, I think, joined the Blaze, which is where you're going to, I know, mention next, I was like, this girl is good. She's really solid. And obviously you're amazing. So,
well, thanks. So yeah, I started that, which like you said, there weren't that many millennials who were publicly identifying as conservative. Like there was you, there was Ben Shapiro, and there was Tommy Lahren. And those were the people that, you know, the young conservatives that people thought of. But it was a whole thing at the time. You always saw it on Fox News every time you turn it on, that all the millennials, they're so progressive, they're so far left, they're so lazy. So at the time, the moniker conservative millennial was, everyone knew that there was some like, it was kind of seen as a paradox at the time, which is why I chose it. So started writing, started posting videos, and back then you could post things on Facebook and they wouldn't get taken down. Like you could say what you wanted to say, and if people liked it, it would go viral. And there wasn't a ton of censorship, kind of just like the wild west of the internet at the time. And so my videos just started getting more views. And then, the election happened in 2016. That was kind of just like striking iron while it was hot and talking about such a contentious election. And then 2017 is when I joined the Blaze. There's a lot. Just I see God's hand in how he orchestrated all of that. But I actually started there not as talent, not as a host, but as the social media manager. And then I just kept making videos and I kept speaking and kept talking to organizations about why these cultural, political, moral issues matter, especially to young people. And then in 2018 is when I started Relatable, which is my podcast. And
the Blaze was smart. They're like, let's get this girl a show. What are we doing?
So I'm very thankful for all the people who took a chance on me at the time and gave me that opportunity. It was actually, then I moved to CRTV. If you remember that, Conservative Review TV.
They're now part of the Blaze?
And now they merged with Blaze to become Blaze TV. So anyway, that's how all that worked out. And yeah, now I still host Relatable. And so I guess we're going on, how many years is that? Like 6 years, which is crazy. So yeah.
That's amazing. How many episodes are you at?
Almost 1,000.
Wow.
I know. It's insane.
That's amazing, Allie.
Yeah. And I mean,
and you've had how many babies during that time?
3 since 2018.
You are highly productive.
Oh gosh. Well, now we have a team of people and I wouldn't be able to do it without them. And of course, my family, we all work together on this. And so, yeah, I'm very thankful for how the Lord has orchestrated all of it. And gosh, I just feel more passionate than ever in talking about the things that we do, because as you know better than anyone, these issues are a matter of life and death for people. And every time, I'm sure you feel this way too, you get a message from someone who says, hey, like my mind was changed on this, or here's a sonogram picture. I listened to your guest, or I listened to something you said, or I read something that you said, and I'm pregnant now, like those are the things that give you energy to keep persisting, because it can be discouraging at times, can be disheartening, but minds are still changing, as you well know.
So you're unapologetic about complete rejection of abortion. You know, there's a lot of people, even in the conservative space, who are like, some abortions, I can understand. It's like, no, this is killing a baby. You're unapologetic about things like IVF and surrogacy, about calling, you know, the evils associated evil, even though there's obviously the beauty of a new life with at IVF. In some cases, it can bring new life into the world. Many lives are killed. You've been very on the cutting edge of a lot of that, I think, in the conservative space, where people right now, especially on the pro-life side, are even saying, no, we need to protect IVF at all costs. I mean, there's kind of moral confusion, I would say, in the pro-life space, even at this time. What forms your moral vision? How did you get to have the moral vision that you have? And it sounds like you've had this for years. It's not something that you've developed recently. You've had it since before you even started your work.
Well, definitely pro-life, definitely have always been against abortion. But I would say, and I've talked about this before, that even a few years ago, I would say probably 7 years ago, I thought that it was just reasonable and sophisticated to be pro-life. But of course, you should believe in some exceptions. Of course, you should believe in exceptions in the case of rape or incest or maybe something else too. And I thought that that was a totally conservative pro-life position. And it was actually a Facebook comment. I think I said that publicly. I must have made a post on Facebook, and it was a Facebook comment by a random person. I don't even know who this person is, who challenged me on that. And you said, well, what is the difference between a baby who is conceived in rape and a baby who wasn't conceived in rape? If there's no difference, then why is your stance on abortion different for the circumstances surrounding someone's conception? I hadn't thought about it like that. Even as a pro-lifer, someone who would have said that I am adamantly anti-abortion, I still, in those cases, was not thinking about it from the perspective of the baby, which is, of course, what we find with a lot of pro-choice people, is that they haven't even really considered what an abortion is or what's happening in an abortion or why they believe that abortion is okay, because they're not considering the life that is being killed. And I wasn't either, even as someone who would have called myself pro-life. So there are so many lessons in that little exchange, but I just want to encourage people. 1, it's okay to change your mind for the better. 2, don't think that all your time spent on social media is wasted. 3, don't think that you are not accomplishing anything by speaking the truth and love to someone. You really never know what the result is of a truthful message that you sent or a comment that you made, or maybe it was just a comment that you made offhand to a friend. You never know what God is going to use to plant a seed in someone's mind. That person, again, no idea who that Facebook commenter is. Like, she probably doesn't even remember saying that. But God used that person's boldness in that moment to plant a seed in my mind and to change my mind. And God can do that with all of our words. And she might not ever know the repercussions or the positive consequences of what she said. And the same is true for us. We might not see the results immediately of someone's changed heart or changed mind, but we are still called to be faithful in speaking the truth in love. So I know that was like a winding way to answer your question, but I just want to encourage people that it's not like I have always been perfectly pro-life, even for as long as I've called myself pro-life. I would say that by God's grace that I have become more adamantly pro-life, more consistently pro-life and anti-abortion. And that includes what I think about IVF and surrogacy, which I just hadn't thought about until a few years ago. I just hadn't thought about it. And then I was getting so many questions from my audience. What do you think about IVF? What do you think about surrogacy? What do you think about hormonal birth control? I had loose thoughts on it, but like a lot of people, especially evangelicals, I just thought, well, you know, if it's a way for people to have a baby, we love babies, we love life. Isn't it such a noble desire to want to have kids? And gosh, it would be so crushing to struggle with infertility. Sure, what's wrong with IVF? I had no idea that it involves the creation of so many embryos. I had no idea that we had millions of embryos on ice. I had no idea that it involves eugenics and you're testing the different embryos, not just for their gender, but for their disabilities, and discarding those embryos that you don't want. The embryos are abandoned, that they're in the middle of custody cases. I had no idea that all of these little tiny defenseless image bearers of God are being abandoned on ice indefinitely, are being discarded, are being thawed, are being killed. I had no idea. But you actually cannot have the industry of in vitro fertilization without the destruction of embryos. I didn't know that. So when I started looking into it and thinking about it, there's this great book, Ethics for a Brave New World. I love it. I recommend that every Christian read it. And I started reading what they were saying about reproductive technology and reading what goes on. That was like just a light bulb went off. And it's probably annoying to some people, like how persistently I've been talking about it over the past few years. And I'm sure that I have lost plenty of followers and plenty of subscribers from it because it's a hard thing to talk about. It's a sensitive subject. And I'm sure some people are like, can you just let this go? Especially 2024. Like, you're going to lose the election for us. I just can't. And people's minds can change. People's minds can change on this because just like with abortion, so many people don't look at it from the perspective of the embryo, from the perspective of the baby when it comes to surrogacy and all kinds of reproductive technology. And if we want to be consistent about upholding the dignity of babies from the point of conception, then we have to consider that when it comes to reproductive technology too.
There's some people that say, well, there's a way to do it super narrow where you only do one embryo at a time, create one embryo at a time, implant the embryo, then if it doesn't, embryo doesn't take or whatever, do it again. Yes, miscarriage happens naturally. So if you miscarry the embryo, it's not like, it's not that much of a violation of the natural order. Now, I've seen studies that say that if you do it that way, for the average infertile couple, if they had not done IVF at all, the success rate would be the same. Meaning if they have unexplained infertility, they've had it for a few years, and they just continue to try naturally, the rate of success for both of these methods are similar or the same. Yeah. But what's your take on that response? Because some Christians and non-Christians will say, okay, but I'll just do it really ethically. I'll do IVF really ethically.
Yeah. I think that is better than creating, say, a dozen embryos. Yes, I think it is better. Of course, I think it's better. But you still have to ask the questions, the ethical, moral, and biblical questions as Christians of what happens when we take conception outside of its intended context, which is in the context of love, in the context of sex between a husband and a wife. Whenever technology takes us, this is a phrase we say a lot on Relatable, whenever technology takes us from what is natural to what is possible, we have to ask, is this moral? Sometimes it is. Not all technology is bad, but when you're talking about creating life and creating life outside of its intended context, there are just going to be a lot of consequences, a lot of questions that we have to ask. And I think too, I know that people get really frustrated. For some reason, I don't totally understand it, but I've noticed a lot of frustration for couples who tragically struggle with infertility and are justifying IVF because of that. When someone brings up adoption, they get extremely defensive and extremely angry about that. And I don't want it to seem like I'm insensitive, but I do think that we need to point out that there are many, many children who have already been created, who need homes and who need your love, who you would be a wonderful parent to. So rather than risking it all, getting into this ethically, at best, very questionable situation with creating embryos. And by the way, even with just creating one embryo, I still think there are very few doctors, first of all, who will even do that because they want to test all the embryos to make sure that they're going to have a high chance of taking. So anyway, but rather than wading into that ethically questionable situation, why not choose the objectively redemptive option, the option that is reflected in the gospel, the option that we see through scripture that we have been, as Gentiles, adopted by God through Christ. And like, if we have the opportunity to reflect that versus going this very morally, again, at best, questionable route, then I think that is the best choice to take.
I think it's a mentality shift that's needed too when it comes to kids. And again, I understand too, this can be so sensitive. Here I am, I'm pregnant. I'm very blessed that, you have your children. I'm blessed with children. This is not something we can ever take for granted. It is pure privilege to get to parent and to be biological or spiritual or adoptive parents of any kind. But I think in our society, there's this sort of on-demand mentality where you want to be a parent, you're entitled to pursue it to whatever ends you can, provided you have the money and the means to see if you can achieve that goal that you have, as opposed to being a parent is about the child. And so in the case of adoption, especially adopting a child that's not a newborn, you're talking about a baby that maybe has trauma or issues from the way they were raised, but they're in the foster system and they're up for adoption. There are these children, these are many times tough cases. The focus there is serving that child and sacrificing for that child. And that's a different calculus, I think, for a lot of the modern mindset, even in the Christian world, than we're used to. Because it's like, I want a baby, I have this dream of this, of this baby, and not necessarily I'm ready to sacrifice for a baby that's not even biologically mine.
Yeah. And IVF, and this is not my original phrasing, I think it was maybe Katie Faust who said this originally, but IVF, and really a lot of forms of reproductive technology, you're asking the child, you're asking the baby to sacrifice on your behalf. With IVF, even when you're doing the more ethically route of just creating one embryo, the rate of attrition is high. The chances of that embryo thawing, not making it to transfer, is really high. So that's not even talking about what happens after the embryo is in the womb and whether or not it's going to implant. Like, the process of going to the lab to the womb is very risky. And you are asking that defenseless child without, their consent, saying, I want you to make that risky, possibly deadly journey because I think I am justified based on my desire to have a child. And again, the desire to have a child is a beautiful, understandable desire. And both of us have a lot of compassion for the pain of infertility, but no pain justifies asking a child to make that kind of sacrifice on behalf of our desires.
And to be clear, you're talking about the process from the beginning of creating that life to then ask that dangerous journey of that life, as opposed to, I know in some cases there's embryo adoption, or they call it snowflake adoption.
Yeah.
The life's already been created.
Right.
So
right.
you're now adopting and giving that child the chance. But that's the whole idea with IVF is I'm going to go create this life to then enter this journey of danger and difficulty and often even death, because some babies, like you're saying, so many are discarded or frozen indefinitely.
And can I ask you a question? Because a lot of my Catholic friends talk to me about the theology of the body. And one thing I love about Catholic teaching is how consistently clear it has been on spelling out, okay, this is what we think about IVF. This is what we think about surrogacy. Whereas while there are many evangelicals who are strong on this, there are many who have never thought about it. And that's probably true of Catholics too. There are probably Catholics who maybe don't know the church's teaching on it. But what does the Catholic Church specifically say about IVF, even in those technically more ethical situations?
It's always wrong to separate the procreative from the unitive. What that means, and you were speaking to this earlier really beautifully, but marriage, the sex belongs within marriage, and sex is designed to be open to life. It doesn't always bring life. Obviously, we know that. Women's not always fertile. It doesn't always happen. And it's designed to be unitive, bringing the couple together in their married, their sacramental love. And with IVF, you're plucking the unitive away from the procreative. So you're now saying, I'm going to go create this baby in a test tube or whatever, and it's no longer in the marriage bed. And so that, even if there was, everything else was taken care of with IVF, somehow magically, right? Which can't, it's just not the way it works. It would still be wrong, because you're removing the marriage love, as you said earlier, the bond of love from the act of bringing that life into the world. And children deserve that. That natural order that God designed. And there's biological safeguards built into that too.
Right.
But you are right that in the Catholic world, as in the evangelical world, there's many people who don't understand. The church's teaching is very clear and has been, and I'm very grateful for that. And one of the reasons I became Catholic was learning about this, the cohesiveness of the teaching and the logic of it and the reason of it. But there's many, many good people, Catholics and non-Catholics, evangelicals, who I don't think fully understand these truths. And so they may pursue IVF, or they're maybe sympathetic to it, or they accept it. And that's where, of course, the work you're doing, this work to educate is so important.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's a very, sensitive topic, and I understand. I'm not angry at those who are offended by it, especially those, like, I have friends who have beautiful children through IVF, and I always want to emphasize to them a few things. That one, the pain of your infertility is understandable and deserves compassion, and no one is taking that away from you. Two, you're a wonderful mom. I know you love your kids just like anyone else. Three, your kids are made in the image of God, just like every other child. And I'm not asking you to regret their existence. And I think that's the difficult thing, that if you are brought to a place of understanding and repentance as someone who has used IVF, and you're looking at the faces of your beautiful children, you feel that repenting from that means you regret the existence of your kids, or you're rejecting the existence of your kids. And no one's asking you to do the impossible. I don't think God is asking you to do that, because, again, your children are made in the image of God. But I think that, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of God's grace, but to be able to say that means was wrong, and I still love my kids so much. But I do believe that sanctification as Christians does bring us to that place.
And it's the pro-life position, right? That no matter the means of your fertilization, your conception, you're a child of God. You're made in his image, and you are precious. Your life is sacred. But that doesn't always mean the means of your conception, because we deal with these cases all the time in the pro-life space, that unplanned pregnancy outside of marriage, or, severe cases of sexual violence. All of these different cases that are often used to justify abortion, right? But the means of your fertilization, your conception, does not determine your value.
Right.
Your value is unbreakable. You are valuable because you're human, period.
Exactly.
All right. So you also talk a lot about feminism and women on your podcast, obviously, as a woman, but you're talking to a lot of women. And, I look at modern feminism today, and I know we both share this, and so much of it has just gone insane. It's all about abortion. It's all about even caught up in the LGBT stuff, which is weird because they don't know what a woman is anymore. So how can you be pro-woman and you can't define woman, or anyone can be a woman? But I also think that there's an extreme there that can happen where people say that, women in general are not, there's this extreme of feminism today. And then there's the truth about what is womanhood for. So what's your take on that? What do you think is most missing today that women need to hear about what it means to be a woman?
Yeah, there's so many different subsets of society that I think need to hear a different message, depending on where you're coming from. I think that there is a portion of feminism that tells you that your value is about how much you produce in the corporate world, how much money you make, how much you can prove that you're independent, that you don't need anyone. I think that there is even a portion of the world that says, maybe within Christianity or conservatism, that says your value is tied to being a mom or being a wife. And while those things are wonderful, that's also not where your value comes from. And your value certainly doesn't come from your productivity as a woman, or just as a person in general. But as you said, your value comes from the fact that you were created by a God who placed you here intentionally, who does nothing arbitrarily or accidentally, who placed you here purposely and providentially, and specifically gendered as a woman. You are not just created as a person who happened to develop into a woman in the womb. He created you before time began. He intended you to be a woman. And we're not just human beings. We are human females, or we are male humans, we are female humans, and how we are embodied actually matters. And we see that, of course, throughout scripture, the different distinctions of male and female, going all the way back to the very first chapter of the first book of the Bible. God thought it was so important for us to know that there's a difference between male and female, that he puts it in the very first chapter, in the beginning, Genesis 1:27, in his image he created us, male and female he created us. And so there are things that women have and women can do that are very different than what men can do. Obviously, the greatest superpower, the most unique thing about us is that we have a womb, that we can create children, that we can create life, that we can nourish that life with our bodies. I mean, that is so incredible and so amazing. And as we've talked about many times, I feel so privileged and so blessed to have been able to do that, to still be able to do that. I'm so thankful for that. But something that I also remind my predominantly Christian audience is that, like, your highest calling as a woman, your highest calling is not to be a wife and mom necessarily. Your highest calling is to glorify God. And the reason why that message is important for probably most people watching this are probably Christian conservative is because I want women to know that you can glorify God fully right now as you are. I think sometimes we see our singleness as a waiting period, or the period after we're married and before we have kids is this waiting period where we can't really fully be a woman yet. We can't really fulfill God's call yet. We can't really be happy. We can't really be satisfied until we find our husband, until we have kids. Then we'll finally, fully, really be a woman. But you are a woman at the point of conception, or female at the point of conception, and you are fully right now the woman that God has called you to be in this moment, and you can fulfill whatever he is calling you to right now with fullness of joy, with fullness of grace, fullness of strength. You are not in this arbitrary waiting period where you will finally one day find fulfillment through whatever station God has for you. I actually think that's like a trick of Satan to make you think that at this point in your life, whether you're single or you're childless, that you're just twiddling your thumbs before you can really glorify God. God has you where he has you for a purpose, and your womanhood and your value as a human being are not tied to your titles or even your relationships. As beautiful and as big of a blessing as those things are, that's not where your value and where your calling comes from. And that's really good news, because that means that our value and our calling, they're fixed on something that is immovable, and that is Christ. And Hebrews 13:8 says Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And if that is where our calling, that is where our purpose, that is where our fulfillment comes from, then that is really good news, because that frees us up right now to fully pursue whatever God has called us to do, no matter what stage of life you're in.
That's so well said. I think it can be confusing for some people because we are made as women to mother sounds like, what does it mean to mother? But we're made with this womanhood, that can mother, right? And that some of us, that's biological. For all of us, I believe that's emotional and spiritual as we mature ourselves. Like we go from being mothered to mothering. And so that desire is very natural, and it's good, and it is part of our identity. It is part of our feminine identity. But I think what we've lost, especially in the Christian tradition today, in the modern Christian world, parts of the world anyways, is this tradition in Christendom of the celibate woman. And, what does it mean to be a celibate woman? Well, in the past, you literally had the virgin martyrs. You literally had women who rejected marriage and having biological children, and were even killed for it because they would reject the advances of the king or whatever, and they would be martyred because they said, Jesus Christ is my spouse and my only spouse. And I've taken a vow of celibacy. And so there's just like radical early tradition in the church to do that. And then over the years, that's developed into the religious life. You have, convents, you have sisters, you have nuns, and they're living motherhood. They're literally called sisters and mothers, but they have spiritual children.
Right.
It's a different approach to living out the feminine identity.
Yeah.
We all share universally the call to, I think, a motherhood as we mature, whether that's biological or spiritual.
Yeah.
But we've kind of lost that sensibility. I mean, in modern day America, of course you see occasionally once in a blue moon a nun or a sister. And I think it's always a curiosity for a lot of people, like, oh, what is this woman in this habit,
Yeah.
But we've lost that in a lot of our churches today, because the identity instead for you're a good woman is like, oh, I need to be a wife and a mother. And so it makes all the more sense why I think that single woman might feel like I'm not doing it. You know, I'm not living it.
Yeah, that's such a good point, that all women are called to mother in one way or another. And you actually see that manifest itself in some, I think, unhealthy ways in our culture, in either replacing children with your job, replacing children with
your
pets.
dog.
Yes, with pets, replacing them with plants, replacing them with your boyfriend, whatever it is. We all have this natural biological urge as women to nurture, to nourish, and to mother and to raise up. And we are, in some ways, and I think feminism has really done this, we are trying to suppress that urge and channel it into something else, things that are much lesser than that. Of course, I'm not saying that it's bad to love your pets or to love your plants or to date, have a boyfriend, or love your job even. But as long as we put them in their rightful place, that is not a form of mothering. That is not a form of parenting. These are blessings and gifts that we can enjoy and steward for God's glory, but that's not a replacement. If we have that urge to nourish and to raise up, and God is not giving you children, there are discipleship opportunities, there are mentorship opportunities. We are actually called to do that. In Scripture, we are called to help younger women, to show them what it is to be married and to raise kids, and to help them and encourage them in the Lord. And so, and the church should absolutely be stepping up and providing those opportunities, but those are good urges that you have, and you can fulfill them spiritually. And that is a very beautiful way, a different way, but a beautiful way to fulfill that calling that we all have as mothers.
You may have seen this new statistic that there's a whole cohort of women now, more is increased in the last decade, that don't ever want to have kids.
Yeah.
And that actually the group of women, I don't know the exact statistic, but the group of women who never want to have kids is bigger than the group of men that never want to have kids.
Yeah.
And that's increased over time recently. Why do you think that's happening?
Well, I think it coincides with other studies that I've seen that women, both in the UK and the US, are getting increasingly liberal as men are getting increasingly conservative.
So why becoming liberal makes you not want to be a mother?
Yeah, because it is all...
Not for all women who are liberal, by the way, obviously.
Yeah.
But
I think
that's a correlation.
Well, I think that it is a godless ideology, and that worships the little g god of self. And it urges you to sacrifice all kinds of things, including your own children, on the altar of your own happiness. That's what the god of self does. The god of self is very cruel. The god of self says, you must worship me, you must serve me at all costs. And the god of self says, whatever makes me happy, whatever feels good in the moment, whatever I can do that's within my control, however I identify, whatever I declare that I am, I am. That is what the God of self does. And when you have an entire industry, a self-love, self-help industry that tells you the only way to be happy and the only way to find fulfillment is to perpetually do what you want to do in any given moment, no matter who you cut out of your life, no matter what commitments you forego, no matter what sacrifices you avoid, just do what you want to do in any given moment. An industry that worships and profits from the God of self, then yeah, you're going to get a lot of women who think that they're sticking it to the patriarchy by saying, no, I'm going to do what I want to do, which means I never want to be inconvenienced. I never want to be burdened beyond, what I desire. And yeah, I think the TikToks and the videos that I've seen justifying it or trying to tell us, Chelsea Handler is one of these people who does this. She always makes videos. I'm like, who are you trying to convince, Chelsea? But videos about how awesome it is to be child-free, they say. And it's all about, again, not for everyone, but a lot of these videos, it's like all about consumption.
Or Seth Rogen. Literally, I'm going to consume pot on Saturday mornings and watch TV. TV.
Awesome, dude.
And I'm kid-free and I'm super happy.
Yeah, it's all about consumption.
It's a sad way to live.
Yeah, it's really all about like selfishness. I can drink as much as I want. I can be hungover as long as I'm, again, not speaking to every single person and all their justifications for it, but all the videos that I've seen are all about what is easiest for me, what feels good for me, what can I consume how much money I can make, how many vacations I can
Do you
go
think
on.
part of it is connected though too to social media in general and just media consumption in general? Because it's desensitizing us. It's making us like zombies. And so instead of us experiencing the real world and the joy, the true human joy that comes from relationships with other people in the real world, we're constantly getting dopamine hits and we're training ourselves to want something more superficial. And so that also connects back to why less people today in today's social media saturated world are less interested in human relationships.
I think there's,
Especially with children.
yeah, gosh, there's so much there. I think that's a really good point. I think one, things become a contagion on social media too. So when things start going viral and things are cool and you see all of these people on TikTok or Instagram saying this, you're like, yeah, that looks cool. Then the message spreads, goes viral, whatever. I think that there is an element of being exhausted by everything that we see and hear on social media that we feel like we don't have the capacity to care for another individual. Because we constantly feel the pressure to have empathy for every single person on earth and every single thing they're going through. Every single conflict in the world is at our fingertips and on our shoulders. And we don't have the capacity actually to care about all of those things. I think it stresses our nervous system. We have to care about some of them, but really only God has the capacity to see all things and know all things and care about all things.
Well, and then some people think, I don't even want to bring a child into this world.
Exactly.
Because they're just constantly seeing on social media and in media.
And they don't even feel like they have the capacity to do it because all of their empathy and care is being drained and sucked by the 24/7 news cycle. So yeah, I think social media plays a role for sure.
What do you think the pro-life movement needs to do more of or do differently in order for us to win? And by win, I mean not just continue to be moving forward as a movement, but to abolish abortion, make it totally illegal, and to make it unthinkable.
Gosh, well, I'm just thankful. Let me just say I'm so thankful for what you have done for now so much of your life. And I think that the videos that you put out, that Live Action puts out, that is now a lot of the videos just of the baby development inside the womb, I know are in schools across the country because of Live Action. And what I find is that a lot of people who say that they're adamantly pro-abortion, they could not tell you what happens in an abortion. When you tell them what happens in an abortion, they say that you're lying, but they don't have an alternative. They don't have an alternative to what you're saying. They could actually just go on the Planned Parenthood site and read between the lines and find that out. But most people don't want to because it's very inconvenient. And even though I know the polls say what they say, I know that we've seen several measures across the country in different states that have unfortunately gone the way of the abortion lobby, but I get messages every day and I see the fruit of what you do every day of young people saying, I never thought about it like that. I did not know that. Wow, I can't support my position anymore of being pro-choice, of being pro-abortion. So I think continuing, as hard as it is to hear, talking about what exactly abortion is and what the abortion logic is and why it necessarily informs what we think about exceptions, what we think about IVF, what we think about surrogacy. I think that we really all need to get on the same page there. And we need to do everything that we can to make sure that our elected officials are on the same page. I mean, that's always been the case. I think the commentary class has been far ahead of the GOP. We got to pull them along. I mean, I think that happened for many, many decades before Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Allie for press secretary.
Oh my goodness. What a difficult job.
I know, I don't wish that on you actually.
Yeah, it depends on who it is. Only if the person is under the age of 75.
Which is not going to happen.
Not anytime soon.
At least for a few
But yeah, we need to make sure that our elected officials know why we are pro-life. Not just that we are pro-life. Why are we pro-life? And this has to inform what you say. And we can pull people along. And everyone has their different places in the pro-life movement, but there's got to be people over here that are shifting the Overton window. There's got to be people over here who stake their ground and say no. Not just no to abortion sometimes, but no to abortion all the time. No to all of the questionable things happening in reproductive technology because those babies' lives really matter. And so I don't know that I'm one to give advice, because I think so many organizations are already doing such a great job, and we just have to continue to speak the truth in love as loudly and persistently as we can. And I know that it's, people say that it's not popular in an election year, but I would love to win elections. Of course I would, but I, can't compromise because of one election. I mean, Roe v. Wade, it took 50 years. I'm looking at the long game. So it's much more than 2024. We're looking at the next 100 years.
And if you win an election by compromising your principles, have you won?
Yeah.
Did you win?
Amen. Amen.
Keep it up, Allie.
You too.
You're awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining.